At Council Bluffs Savings Bank, our goal is to help you, your families, and your businesses grow and prosper for generations. We take pride in our community, whether it's volunteering our time or helping individuals, families, and businesses succeed. We provide you with the personal service and attention you deserve. With over 220 years of banking experience, decisions are made locally. We are Council Bluffs people operating at Council Bluffs Bank to help Council Bluffs be a better place to work and live. Council Bluffs Savings Bank. Hometown banking, the way it used to be. Member FDIC.
Larry, do you want to talk about Hannafin River's Edge Park?
Yeah, I can get you. Yeah. Oh. Already have one too.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Are there pictures?
Nope.
Oh.
It's okay. By the time we're ready for it, I'll be charged up enough.
So I visited with the mayor about this resolution that I was preparing and thought I might have it in this week. And the more we talked about it, the more it seemed like I should spend a few minutes with the council talking about what we have been working on. Before you, you see two separate but interrelated documents. These documents speak to, for the first time, setting fees at Tom Hannafin River's Edge Park. As the council know, technically the council sets and authorizes the fees, which we then enforce. The first year of the park, because it was new and we were working all the kinks out of it, working with various promoters and people using the park, we basically didn't charge any fees for the use there. But since then, we've looked at how it's been used. We've talked to some of the people that have used the park. We've looked at fees in other places that are somewhat similar. We've kind of evaluated what we do in Bayless. And so before you today, you'll see a draft of what I intend then to maybe make a few changes on, but move forward to the council maybe at your next meeting. The first document I'd draw your attention to is actually the second one in the packet that says Application for Special Use Permit, and it in fact contains the fees. So the bottom of that first page has the fees that we're proposing. You can see that we've broken the fees into geographic locations in the park. What we found is there are some users who don't need the entire park, some users that might want just a great lawn. So we've set fees up in a way that, that I think really is going to hit pretty close to what most of our requests have been. So those are the rental fees that we talk about in the policy statement. Then the second section is the direct fees that we've encountered that have been used in the park. And that includes things like staging, restrooms, fencing, labor cost, electrical power, and other fees. So the resolution that comes forward to you will essentially, that's what you will see, that these are the fees to be set. The rest of the document you can look at, and it's really just the document that we'll try to have the prospective users fill out. So then I'd call your attention to the other document, which in some ways, I guess to me, is maybe more important. And let me step back a minute and talk about the philosophy of these two documents. As we worked through the first year at Tom Hannafin Park, it became clear that it functions in a couple ways. First of all, it's a great place to be, just to be in a park. And there are people there constantly that are looking at the river, walking through the park, riding bikes through the trail system, soccer practices at night, even some pickup soccer games that we're not supposed to know about but go on there on the weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays. So it gets an extensive amount of use just as a park. The evening light show draws people just to come down to the park. So making the events and how we use them fit with that without deterring that normal use any more than we have to, I think is kind of important. The other point of philosophy is that this is really kind of a unique public space. And in putting this document together, what the department decided was that we would propose to you that it should be used to its maximum by the people who built it, the residents of Council Bluffs, and the visitors and everybody else that's going to come. So the fee structure and the way it's set up is designed hopefully to make that happen. We also are proposing that we look at a way of sort of graduating how the use of it works. And you'll see we've set up, I believe, 5 priorities for use of the park. In addition to fees, there are 2 other elements that users of the park are very concerned about when they come to talk to us. And those 2 things are, first of all, how far in advance can I reserve the park or the section of the park? And second, is there a multi-year opportunity? Can I have my event and then have it for another year and another year without thinking I have to come in and compete with somebody else? So this usage policy addresses those questions by each priority. And you'd have to kind of read through it to look at how we've done it. But in a nutshell, events like Celebrate CB that are, as you see here, free public events. So the emphasis is on the #1 priority is free public events that are regional in nature. And that would be things like Ragbri, the July 4th celebration, Lust Fest, and Celebrate CB. So if they're locally significant, regional in nature, and they're large events, then those are the #1 priority. Those events pay all their direct costs, which means if they want the show wagon, they pay the show wagon rental. If we have to bring in extra staff to set something up, they pay for the staff. If, as they do, they want to make a section for a beer garden, then all the costs for the fencing to create that, they pay for it. If they need extra bathrooms, they pay for that. But they do not pay a set fee. They don't pay the park fee. And then it also explains on what privileges they get as far as being able to schedule in advance and having the rights to reschedule up that day. Why is it important that they're interested in things like scheduling in advance? And why is it important to us? And here's the answer to that. We've had some level of interest in things like weddings. We do a ton of weddings in Bayless. All the time we do weddings in Bayless. And it's appropriate that we do them here. What we want to be sure is that we don't schedule a wedding and then all of a sudden get a chance to do one of these major concerts, which would bring in 10,000 people, and instead we've got a wedding that we're obligated to, and I have to call the mother of a bride and explain why she can't have her wedding. So as you go through this, you'll see that as you get down on the priorities, the length of time that they have to set the date in advance decreases. So that's how we kind of work that through. So you can look through the priorities, and you'll see that as you get down to things like priority #3, where we start to charge entrance fees, or the person putting the event on charges entry fees, that's when it kicks in for them that they'll have to pay the park fees. So the festival that got announced last week with 311, they have to pay the park fees and all the direct fees. And then finally, the final priority, which are the smaller events that are in small parts like weddings, we also are asking there for a park fee like we do at Bayless. And I think looking at the fees, you'll see they're relatively inexpensive. If you want to get married at Tom Hannafin Park and you just want to go out and take a chance that you can get married, you can do that. You don't necessarily have to have a permit or pay the permit amount. But if you want to have some assurance that you're not going to have some wedding on top of where you want to be, if you want to get married out on the beach area in front of the river, then you would go through this permit process. I'd say probably 80% of the weddings in Bayless go through the permit process, pay their fee. we find mother of the brides like to know they're gonna have a place to do it and then they think about how to do it. So it's pretty common. So that's what we've come up with. It is somewhat complicated. We're gonna have to spend time, particularly with major users, when they call in, kind of explaining how to get through it. But at least I think it's pretty well thought out. I think the way we've done it is fair, and it does allow the park to meet the objective of getting the most use from the people that paid for it and putting it in play as much as we can for the public. So if you have any questions, yes.
My first question is, will the priority uses and all this information, including the application, be on the website for people to see? Okay.
As soon as we get it passed, we'll put it on.
Okay, and then the second thing is, on the 45 days in advance on a wedding, for example, is that on par with what's happening at Bayless Park right
No,
now?
no, Bayless, I think it's a year.
A year in advance, okay.
But at Bayless, we're not worried about, well, I mean, when the president called, I think we had to move one wedding, but it's not gonna happen very often. So we're comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with booking a wedding a year in advance and all of a sudden Celebrate CB decides they wanna move to another weekend.
Right, no, I understand that. I was just wondering if 45 days is a little bit too short. I understand the reason behind it, but typically if someone's planning a wedding, they're planning it
yeah.
more than 45 days in advance, so.
And my answer to that, and we've gone through those kinds of things, is they have a lot of other options.
Okay.
Bayless, the last couple that have called, and we've started to tell them, well, kind of 45 days, they've said, well, maybe Bayless. So they have another option. And is it short? Sure. But we have some weddings that call for Bayless and they want to be there in 2 weeks. So you just never know. And then we have some that a year and a half in advance.
Is that a shotgun wedding? Is that what-
I don't know. I had one mother bride call me when the piano appeared down there. Remember the?
Yeah.
And she was just, it's gonna be right in the way of where my daughter's gonna walk and all kinds of things, it was a big deal. Any other questions?
Well, look it over and it'll be on the agenda, maybe next council meeting.
And as you look at it, if you have any questions, you have any thoughts, give me a holler. I'll try to have it on next council meeting and hopefully we can get something set.
Thanks. Greg, you
Thanks,
wanna give
Larry.
us a quick update on the levy and sewer?
Sometime in March, one of the 2 meetings in March, we're proposing to give a presentation on levy accreditation. And so we're trying to get a feel for how much time the council wants to put into that. Is it something we could cover at our normal study session, or do we need a special meeting to discuss levy accreditation? I guess it's an open
This
question.
morning when I talked to Greg, he said he could tell you about it in 15 minutes, but he didn't know how many questions you'd have. And
We'll kind of just brief you on what we've done to date and where we're gonna go from here. So it's just kind of a general information and specifically, what we're gonna be doing in the next 12 months even.
I think study session sounds like we're all here.
What we can do is
if it gets long.
we'll get the presentation in the packet when it normally comes out, and so it'll give you at least some time to look at it, and if you have questions before the meeting, you could maybe tip us off and we'd
Okay.
be prepared then.
So you don't anticipate any decision that's gonna have to be made with a lot of background information in fairly short notice?
Not if you agree with us.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that.
Well, and either at that meeting or the other meeting in March, there'll be an engineering contract that we're gonna ask the council
Okay.
to approve, so.
Okay.
I mean, that's really the only decision we need to make immediately. I think we just wanna let the council know where we're going and what it looks like, and, this is something that's gonna take 10 years to do, so.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be a small ticket item, so
I think we just haven't talked, we've been cranking out analysis, and we just wanna get you an update on what we found and what that means from here on out, so. We'll try and keep it, it's something that, it's pretty deep topic, and we can really, really dig into it, but it takes a lot of time to really to explain it and understand it. As far as, we are also looking at a council meeting in March to bring a engineering proposal to do a sewer rate study. So you might anticipate that coming in the next one or two meetings.
At least the last 2 years, we've lost a significant sewers and garbage pickup or business functions of the city, and we are not covering our costs on the sewer side of it.
So we'll get a consultant on board, and generally the approach they take is to do a cost of service. So they'll tell us exactly what it's costing us to provide the service, broke down by type of user. I think ultimately the council is going to have to give us some guidance on how much subsidy the council or the city wants to provide to the sewer operation that isn't generated by sewer fees, like sales tax, like general obligation bonds, general funds, all the other things that currently are being used to keep sewer rates low. Another big question will be currently residential subsidizes industrial rate structure. So we're one of 2 cities left in Iowa that does that.
Why do we do that?
Well, I mean, we've done it for 30, 40 years. It's to encourage, large users, which are large employers. ConAgra, Mid-America Energy, Tyson, Plumrose, I think are the 4 that fall into that category. So it's like an economic development subsidy. But the question is, do we want to continue that?
So it's topics like that that you'll go over in this update?
But once we get the consultant on board, no, that's, the other one was levy accreditation.
Oh.
There's another one that's the sewer
Okay.
rate study, and those are questions ultimately at some point we're gonna have to ask for some input on. Okay.
Thank you. All right, to the agenda. Anything in the consent agenda that,
I had a couple of questions on, let's see, on E and F, did anyone have anything before that?
I had something, but I'll follow you, that's fine.
Oh, all right, thank you. On 3E, I had a question about the proposed contract on West Pierce. Actually, 2 questions, I'll just ask them quickly, they're probably related. I certainly won't dispute that Pierce West and East Pierce needs some reconstruction. I see this one is proposed for West Pierce to potentially take account of some economies of scale, save some money with the proposed building on the former Bud's Hobby site by PCDC. Would the project have gone forward at this time if that PCDC project were not on the table? And secondly, regardless of that, would it, have we looked at East Pierce is just as bad of east of South First there as West Pierce, particularly at the corner where not really even a corner, where the street jogs at Grace, if I recall correctly. There's quite a bit of a line of sight issue, even without snow or rain. And I noticed this proposal goes all the way past Glen Avenue, but doesn't address east of South First. I'm just curious, the thinking behind that, the timing.
To answer your first question about the timing, we don't actually save any money as far as economy of scale in our project versus their project because they are 2 separate scopes.
Okay.
But we do save ourselves a lot of headache because of phasing and coordination between what will be apartments and commercial properties, and we would then be tearing up their front door, versus now it's a vacant building, an empty lot. So by doing it now, that saves a lot of potential cost, I guess, with adding more phases in the project, because we'd have to coordinate their entrances and exits versus now we don't have to worry about that. As far as moving the project forward, as you acknowledged, the street is in poor condition and is in need of rehab. We're currently working in the First Street neighborhood. I'm not sure this would have happened this year had that project not come about at this time, but we felt it was warranted to accelerate it and get it done at the same time. Again, it's just inconvenience factor.
Would the cost to the city go up if West Pierce weren't done to that degree and some work were done on East Pierce this year? I appreciate that would probably increase the cost to the developer if they'd have to come in and tear up, but I assume that'd be at their expense. It wouldn't be at taxpayer expense, would it?
I'm not sure, they wouldn't have to do anything to the street other than construct their entrance to the street.
Okay.
I mean, the utilities in the street are our responsibility, and I think most of their services being provided from the 100 block side. So when they connect to the gas or the water or those things, they're connecting from the bottom end of the development rather than the upper end. So I don't believe they would have had to have gone into the street for their development. It's just very close as far as adjacent work, so.
Sure. Is it,
And the problem that they've got a 50 space parking lot that's gonna access Pierce Street.
I see.
So when he talks about phasing, you'd have to do a portion of the paving up to that access point and then do a second phase from that access point where now you can tear the whole street out in one.
Well,
Make it one.
we're contending with the Lyle's Tire for the most part, because that is an active business and they get people in and out. So we're structuring the phasing of the project to accommodate that business. That's tough in itself, but if you add in multiple businesses, potentially restaurants, whatever's on the first floor of that development, plus apartment building, we now have to phase for one side of the street for the tire place and all those other users on the other side with a parking lot, etc. It would be extremely tough just to build it. So by doing it while that's being constructed, that's a much easier way to build the street.
I see your point. My only concern is the potential perception that we might be rebuilding streets to benefit certain folks, no matter, the merits or not of a proposal versus other parts nearby that might need the street itself more than that particular section may. So is there a timing schedule as to East Pierce, for example, particularly around the Gray Street? I get quite a few folks who say they have quite a few near misses. I know I've had them myself.
The issue, I think the biggest issue on East Piece is actually the alignment of the street, and it's an active or a home that's in use. So there's not a lot we can do with that unless we were to buy that house.
Sure.
We're not actively seeking to do that at this time. If you see one of the other public hearings is the First Street neighborhood, and it includes Grace and Stutzman and 2 East Pierce. But right now, East Pierce itself is not in the project for this year. My personal opinion is the pavement is in worse condition on West Pierce than it is in East Pierce. Now, there may be an issue with that intersection, and we are looking at the stop condition there. Yeah. We've had a few detours set up through there where we put up temporary stop signs, and there's been a question, well, maybe we should look at, does it make sense to leave those permanently or not, or so that's one of the things we talked about when this project this year is complete, that we're going to look at that intersection and maybe the stop condition that is there.
And that basically would be my concern. I want to make certain that it's seen as a cohesive, so I'm certainly not implying it's favoritism. I just want it to not even to appear to be. And so, because there are some concerns, I know with the detour when Lincoln was being redone, and I know it's got a little bit left to do, that it gets very confusing in that area. And I think maybe we ought to look at it as a comprehensive, both to the extent we can, obviously, at the same time. Or certainly at least make the other half of it just as much of a priority in the following year.
We can certainly look at that.
Thank you. Did you have? No, that's all I had on that point.
Yeah, but yeah, mine was on 3F, if you wanted to address that one also.
Oh, all right, thank you. With regard to the West Broadway Urban Renewal Plan on 3F, I just had a question of, basically, an overview, what is the ultimate purpose? I can appreciate it is to make the area viable again. I just was curious as to the extent to which any historic preservation might be applicable, or if there's any property consolidation, if there'll be a public notice so that anyone could have a chance to bid on the property. Again, just an appearance issue. I'm not sure whose question. Would that be to Don?
Yeah.
This plan amendment really is intended to incorporate into the West Broadway Urban Renewal Plan projects that we have agreed that we are going to do, such as the acquisition of the Bungay elevator, the demolition thereof. Perhaps a project at the 2200 block of West Broadway, which we had you approve a letter of intent last meeting. State law requires, in order for the finance or the city to certify debt against it, you must put this type of information into your document. We have to describe the nature of the projects that we're doing, a guesstimate or an estimate of the potential TIF that you would be seeking reimbursement for.
And would that be a plan that comes later? I guess I'm confused as to the timing as to when the specifics would be more fleshed out.
The specifics of what?
Well, like the things you just mentioned, for example, the timing, the amount of TIF that'd be involved, the area, the ultimate purpose, that kind of thing.
The whole thing?
The portion that is part of this amendment.
Isn't this a prelude to a development that would come along later?
Well, I mean, like I said here, public improvements, okay? Demolition of the remaining railroad line in First Avenue. I mean, what other information do you need?
Well, I
other
want to
than that.
know if we have a plan as to what, if we spend money on the area to do things, what we ultimately are going to do with it.
Oh, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I just want to make certain that, that we're spending money on something that
I mean,
we're going to get it
understand,
out of it.
the fact that you're just putting this in the document doesn't mean that I'm gonna go out and spend
Oh, no.
1.5 million on that.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
very much appreciate that, yeah.
I mean, part of the issue is the state law dictates that we actually have to have an urban renewal plan.
Okay.
Now, that, I will use the word plan very loosely.
I see.
It is a requirement that we have to go through. We have to notify people, and it is a cumbersome process.
Yeah.
So while we were going through the 2200 block development project, there were other projects that we potentially could be doing. So we inserted that.
And is that subject to some sort of public bidding process, just so I can be educated? And some folks asked me about that, just so that we know.
Public hearing process?
Yeah,
Well, that's what you're saying.
well, for example, if later we decide that there's a potential to do X or Y, or perhaps we choose one or the other, let's say I were a potential developer and I wanted to put something there, how would I go about getting a hearing in other words, as a council, are we allowed to just pick one, or does it get sent out for bids? How do we ensure that people have a fair shot at doing something in that area?
On the property that we purchase?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, state law requires that you have to have a public hearing on the disposition of property.
Sure.
Any property acquired in an urban renewal district actually requires you to have a 30-day notice requirement, and you do have to take proposals.
Is that gonna be part of what we're now putting on the website? I was just curious of the process that people would know about it.
No, you know, because I mean, it's spelled out in state law. And, you know, if we were going to dispose of, for example, Trainer State Bank came in.
Sure.
They submitted a proposal, okay? What are we required to do? We're required to have a public hearing on that proposal. And we're supposed to put it 30 days out. We're also required to advertise and tell the public,
Yeah.
well, the city's got a proposal on Lot X. If you're interested in Lot X, you can submit a proposal, and this is what you should submit, and this is who you submit it to.
Does that, just for my edification, does that go through the paper? Are we allowed to pick the means that we use for that
Nope,
advertising?
has to be a public notice.
Oh, so the paper?
It's prescribed, it goes right to a specific section in the state code, which I'm pretty sure
Okay.
says you put it in, the daily non-pareil.
Do you know of
And we
any?
typically would post that too.
Sure. I was just curious, because I assume that's the minimum. I'm just curious if maybe we ought to go to my colleague's point, Councilmember White's point previously, with which I agree about houses and, you know, that come up so that people can know about them. I would think we could also do that too, put it on the website or, you know, go beyond what the law requires and do that additional step to let folks.
Well, that requires resources,
Sure, I
you
appreciate it.
know, and they're not necessarily always there. And
I appreciate that.
they're not necessarily properties that our office controls.
Appreciate that too. I'm just.
And you know, quite frankly, some of the houses and the inquiries we get,
Yeah.
I have no idea whether they're capable of being rehabbed.
I
I
would
don't
think,
have the skill to do that. I don't have the staff to do that.
I wouldn't, I'm not,
So until they're really released to me,
sure. I'm
that
not
that's
really,
capable.
I'm not really, I'm not implying that you would have to make that determination, but if that were put out, I would think folks who were interested in buying it could make that determination for themselves. I'm certainly not suggesting we as a city go into
Well,
a renovation business.
what houses do we have that are worth selling, other than the one on Crescent Drive?
I personally would leave that up to the market to decide. If somebody wants to pay us for it, I'm not gonna,
The only ones that I know that we're getting
yeah.
are through a 657A process. And the building official or the code enforcement people have said, it doesn't meet codes.
I
You know,
appreciate
and
it.
if they want to release that and tell me that this property could be salvaged,
Yeah.
we'll deal with it.
Well,
But, you know, a decision has been made
yeah.
that it doesn't meet code and the property needs to be abated.
Sure, but.
And the only way to do that is to tear it down.
That could be, but maybe maybe I'm out there and I don't know of it, and I don't necessarily read the small print in the back of the paper, but I might read if it were posted. Not so much a city warranting it or viewing it, just putting the notice we put in the paper, we also just copy and paste into some web page that would, so I'm concerned that everybody, that not only it be fair, but be seen to be fair, and that we get the most money we can for it. I would,
Well, what I'm concerned with is another department going through a legitimate process
sure,
and doing their job. Because they've had neighborhood complaints,
sure,
that a house is vacant, it doesn't meet code. They go through court, they obtain title to it, and then somebody's trying to slide in on the side, and there's no guarantee of, well, if we dispose of it, how are we going to ensure that it isn't subject to a 657A in 6 months?
I appreciate that, but if someone's gonna pay us more, odds are they're going to take it seriously, or just like anyone
Who's
else.
gonna pay us more? I mean,
Well-
they can always submit an offer.
That's what I mean, if somebody submits a higher offer, if we already are required to put it in the paper, most folks don't necessarily read the small print. So I think it's just increasing the ability to get more
Well,
people.
somebody has to declare it surplus, okay?
I agree, yeah.
You know, and I'm not gonna sit here and say, I'm gonna declare park property surplus, or public works property surplus, or property that the building division has, the surplus. I'm willing to deal with what the community development department acquires for development purposes. And we will go through a specific publication process, we always have.
Sure.
But it's very difficult to put our office out in front of trying to determine what really everybody else has and what is surplus and what isn't.
Why can't we just take the notice that we put in the paper and also put it on the website?
We have every lot that I'm aware of that is available to be purchased on our website.
And is that the one you can get from the main page? I'm sorry, I haven't looked at it
It
recently.
goes to our departments.
Okay.
So,
That's really my only concern, and my goal is not certainly to create another layer of bureaucracy or difficulty.
I mean,
It's-
if somebody comes to me and say, hey, we got this house through donation.
Sure.
We got this house through code action. And if they want to say to me, hey, we think it's salvageable.
Sure.
We'll deal with it. But
Sometimes
that's the
somebody
one out of
might,
20 things.
that's true, but sometimes somebody might want the lot, let's just, for sake of argument, say the structure on it right now needs to be torn down.
And it will be torn down and would be added to the inventory.
And I would think then we'd want it advertised so that more people, the most people that could.
It is
would want-
advertised, it's on the web.
Okay.
You could also
my
list
question.
it,
Yeah.
if that's what you want to do. I mean, if you really want to effectively get rid of this, list it with the realtor.
I don't know if I'd necessarily go that far. I think we ought to just
Well, I mean-
make sure we list them so that people,
I don't have a bunch of buyers in my pocket.
I think we'll
But a
find them or
realtor- But
not.
a realtor, that's what their job is. They have the buyers.
Oh, I agree, but some folks may just want to show up with cash and buy it and not necessarily want to go through a realtor, so. It sounds like though we do put them on the web, and that's just really what I was asking.
The vacant ones, yes. All I can tell you on West Broadway is this. We are doing this because we have to include in our plan those projects that we intend to certify debt against. Okay?
Yes, I appreciate that.
We will be going through a major amendment to the whole urban renewal district, actually trying to expand it is our proposal,
Okay.
essentially from A to second. Right now, it's A to first. And like I said, it is it's really not necessarily a plan of action.
Sure.
It's a plan, well, they call it a plan in the state law, and we will submit a document that is sufficient to meet that. At the same time, we are receiving, others are interested in West Broadway, others
Sure.
are wishing to provide us funding for additional planning. We are going to be looking at West Broadway. We will look at transportation. We will look at landscaping. We will look at priority sites that we feel that we could redevelop. We will look at what types of uses, what the market is. Should we be concentration on small retail? Should it be concentration on big box retail? Should it be residential? Should it be industrial?
Well, I agree with you on all of those things and very much support it. I just want to make certain everybody has a chance to know about it in a reasonable way. And it sounds like we are putting them on there, so I very much appreciate that.
Well, nothing that our office doesn't go through a board or a commission that doesn't get published probably twice.
Well, I agree. I just, as much as I love legal notices and may occasionally read them, I know most folks don't.
And
so-
I assure you, if you as a private developer come in,
Yeah.
okay? And you own a piece of property and you say, I'd like to tear this building down, I'd like to build this other building.
Sure.
There really is no necessarily public process there. I mean, there is and there isn't. I mean, you would probably be entering a development agreement that actually has a public hearing attached to it. So people would have the opportunity to say, well, I don't think you should be doing that, or yes, I like that.
Oh, I agree.
But if it is a property that the city assembles and acquires,
Yeah.
and is going to dispose of it.
you know,
There are specific state requirements for that.
and
And then quite frankly, most times we will advertise it, we will seek RFPs. That's what we did on Spencer, that's what we did on Nash Boulevard. We will do that if our purpose was to assemble it for redevelopment purposes. We want the competition, we want people to know about it,
absolutely, I just think,
because there will be
the
other
earlier they
things.
know, the earlier they know, the better, because it's awfully hard once the train's left the station, so to speak. If there's a proposal on the table to try to derail it, to take that metaphor further, and as opposed to from the get-go, just knowing it's there, because, you know, we might have assembled some land together that's derelict, and I agree with you, needs to be redeveloped. But somebody else might have a better idea and/or be willing to pay a lot more for it, and that at least flushes that out.
Well, it's not necessarily always what you pay for the property is the most important thing. It could be, maybe it's the type of project you really wanted.
That's a very good point, too.
Maybe it is a commercial development or a housing development this community's never had.
Sure.
Maybe it's something that created a significant amount of tax base and jobs.
Oh, I agree with you. That's why I want
one
to, more
is-
chances we have to,
Maybe one
Flush those out the better.
is aesthetically heads and above the other one.
indeed. Thank you.
Oh, you had a question on that one?
Well, perhaps more of an observation. Mine will be easy by comparison. I received a few phone calls after the agenda came out, so we know at least 2 or 3 people out there are reading this once it's posted online. And they were concerned that when they saw the West Broadway urban renewal redevelopment plan, they were wondering if this is part of the master conspiracy to turn West Broadway into a bike path. And so I was kind of interested to see, well, what's in the plan. So I dropped by your offices. You were still out vacationing. I like your tan very much.
And my guess is, not to interrupt you, but my guess is you looked at the West Broadway Urban Renewal Plan, which essentially meets the state requirements. It does not tell you a whole lot.
And it was in great volume. Much of the paper had long since turned brown since the original plan dates
Yes.
back to 1987. And I noted that, my goodness, this is a real bureaucratic test for you to go back and have to amend this every time a new project is considered. So this is a major bureaucratic undertaking for your staff.
And every year it gets worse because some people who don't like TIF will try to sabotage it by giving you more regulations to follow through with.
Funny how that happens.
Yes,
So having said that, since since there are some people out there worried about the evil master conspiracy to turn West Broadway into a bike path, at such time as plans are developed for West Broadway, how that street is possibly going to be reworked, it might be useful then to draw back a reference point to this urban renewal plan and the history behind it, so that people can kind of better understand how all these concepts begin to get tied together.
well, yes, I understand what you're saying. All I can say is right now we are in the midst of trying to get our final deliverables on the overall master plan for the community, which really is more growth orientated, land use orientated. Once we get that done, which we do anticipate that's gonna take us halfway through the year. We are under pressure by some and our own selves because we own 10 acres, let's say, or 12 acres at Bungie. What are we gonna do with it? I have ideas, but we do feel that we need to go through a public process. We need to go through some market assessment to establish that. But we have time. I mean, we still have demolition to do and other site preparation work to do, regardless of how you're gonna develop it. So, and we will start that, probably send out, and we will be asking you to approve sending out an RFP and how we're going to pay for that, for the whole West Broadway corridor. There will be a steering committee, there will be public hearings, there will be numerous ways people will know. You know, I've been here 28 years and I yet have not done a plan that hasn't involved a significant amount of public participation, or at least the invitation of it.
Correct, and I realize that this urban renewal plan has to keep on marching forward while plans are being considered as to what to do with the highway and West Broadway. I'm just saying, once we reach that point,
Yeah.
it might be useful then for the public, at least then, tie these things together, because at least right now, there seems to be a bit of confusion as to what these
Well, you'll
words mean.
certainly have control over that process, and that you'll have to accept the property from the state of Iowa. You'll have to look at the plans for
You know, and
redevelopment.
I don't know that, I mean, I could turn to Greg right now and say, Greg, when are you gonna fix Broadway? He doesn't know. I mean, he's gotta have the money. You know, so numerous departments, with Public Works, definitely Parks, some others, we're gonna have to go through and get all kind of on the same page of, okay, this is what West Broadway's gonna look like. This is the number of lanes, this is the type of landscaping that we're gonna try to do. Personally, I think it's, pretty much what you see. But there are other questions that I don't think we have answers to.
Completely understand. I'm not questioning the timing of the process. I'm just saying that sometimes it helps to pull things together so the public has a broad understanding of what's being sought.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, that's it.
All right, thanks. Anything else in the consent agenda?
Just had two questions for Art, and it may have to go back to department heads, just a couple. I was looking over the, list of bills. Get there real quick. I'm just kinda curious. We rented, grader rental? Probably Greg, is that for a month?
No, we do that every year.
Oh, okay. 'Cause we're gonna go, wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot to rent it, but it's a lot more to buy it.
Oh, I'm sure it's, but you have to imagine when I saw that and thought that might be a monthly fee, that was a little disconcerting.
What's the total disbursement?
$13,050.
So I think we had 3 months, and I think there were 3 units, or
3 or 4.
3, yeah. And so it's about 12 unit month rentals.
Oh, thank you, that makes me feel a lot better. Okay, and then the other one, again, was just a curiosity factor more than anything else, and just to see what it was for. Best Buy, that's not one TV, is it?
It is, and it's a 90-inch television. I think that was $799.
It's $8,399.
Yeah, that was for the library, for the multi-purpose media room. I asked the same question when I saw it. I thought, where are we opening the sports bar?
Really?
Housewives of Beverly Hills are full size.
Yeah, 'cause I was thinking, gosh, if I took all my TVs and added them all together, I don't think it's gonna be that high.
Yeah, that was for the library.
Okay, and then, I think, Larry, you're here, league shirts for the parks, is that for the city teams and then they pay for their shirts, or is that for city employees to play leagues, or what's the?
I believe those are T-shirts that the kids get, and they pay for them as part of their entry fees.
Okay, that's what was my assumption, thank you.
Other consent agenda items? All right. Public hearing for A. I'm sure that there may be some questions in regards to the budget.
My first question is on the, and I like the pie chart, so thank you very much for doing that, on both the income and the expense side.
And when you, if you get a specific question on a page, can you reference that so everyone can follow along?
Okay.
They're not page numbers.
Except it's not numbered.
Okay.
Tab. maybe.
So it's under
ahead.
tab 2. My first question is, on the pie chart of expenses, about 40% of the expenses are not described. So can you let me know what those 3 colors are that are not detailed? It's, the last
Okay.
page in the second
Bus-
section, if that
bus-
helps you.
Yeah, it's business-type activities. That's probably the 9.5%. Capital would be the 23.2,
Okay,
and probably debt service is the other one that, yeah.
Blue one?
Debt service.
okay.
I'm sorry. Had I made the box larger, that would have popped in there.
And business expenses, that's just,
That's sewer, the sanitary sewer operation, and then the sanitation and recycling operation.
okay, thank you.
Those expenses are paid for by user fees rather than,
Yeah, in the terms of the two business-type activities, or we also call them proprietary funds, generally, they should be taken care of by user fees versus property taxes.
For both of those categories,
For-
capital and business?
No, capital is, it's just for the business-type
Just for-
activities.
Okay, thank you. And then, if anybody else has questions while I'm looking for my next one.
Well, could I give an overview
Sure.
of this just quickly? And I know it's, in some ways, it's a repeat of the top page summary, but, you know, when we were looking at the budget for this year, generally the things that come to mind is how much are you spending, how much is it gonna cost me, and where do we stand at the end of the year? And we had some upward pressures on the tax levy for this year. If we were just to let things go in terms of where the tort and liability fund went after the settlement, that would have raised our taxes about 75 cents. And I'm sure that would not have been a popular move to ask anybody to do. And so we looked at some of the other resources that we had. And we found that in two funds, the debt service fund and the employee benefits fund, we had built up reserves over the year, both for good reasons. In the employee benefit fund, when we had heard some retirement costs, we were being told that for over half of our employees, we may find ourselves having to contribute over 40% of salaries to fund retirement benefits in future years. And so we had built up reserves for that. It had gotten as high as $4.5 million a couple of years ago. We found, since then, the organization, the Municipal Police and Fire Retirement System of Iowa has made a couple changes in their actuarial estimates, and the percentages are not as high as they used to be. So we were able to say we don't need to maintain those reserves as high as we did. And for the last 2 years, we've been working those reserves down to about $2 million. Well, that provided a great amount of reduction to the tax levy. And then we looked at the debt service fund, and that generally should be under $1 million, but we saved so much money over the last couple of years in interest that it had gotten up to $2.5 million. So we're able to use that to provide some property tax relief. And when all was said and done, we found ourselves in a position of not having to increase taxes despite having got through the year. Now, what are we doing with our spending? When we look at our payroll, we see that we're not going to increase staff at all. We're going to maintain services at the same level, and in some cases enhance the services without adding to staff. And through the negotiated agreements that we've had, we went line by line and provided you with every city employee, and we're projecting that total payroll is going up 2% next year, and that for the most part corresponds with what the negotiated settlements were. That's a great deal of our total city costs. So we find that we can operate next year providing the same amount of services with no tax increase. What does it do for reserves? Well, we were at the end of 2013, I think we were about $22.5 million in reserves. That's audited. And, that appears in the tab. This year, we will have spent more than we took in the general fund, again, because of that settlement. That would have our reserves going down into the $21.5 million range. I really think the city's reserves need to be about 20% of their actual expenditures in a year, which would put us in the $24 to $25 million range. And that's where we will be next year if we achieve this budget, if we can operate within the budget, realize all the revenues that we're talking about. not spend more than the expenses. And that'll pretty much have us where we need to be in the future for having a reserve built up. So what this budget does, in my estimation, is passes a good operating plan on to the city, does it without increasing taxes, got us through some of the rocky parts of this past year, and leaves us with reserves adequate to meet some of the challenges in the future.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question then?
Sure.
So on in your summaries, on the expenses versus the income, you had mentioned that the expenses, the income, the revenue, is supposed to go up 2.9%,
Yes.
and the expenses are expected to rise 4.4%.
Right.
So the difference, the shortfall is coming from the reserves.
Using those
that-
reserves.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's,
Yeah, that's how we're able to still stay in a good position.
and not raise taxes.
But, you know, we're watching our expenses are going higher than our revenues are, but we're using reserves for some of that. And some people might say, well, are you using reserves? Are you hurting yourself? Well, we've got a handful of different funds. And general fund, you know, that's the most important one. That can fund any sort of thing. And that's the one that we want to keep near $24 to $25 million. The employee benefit fund, you know, you want to have that at a level where you can meet your anticipated needs. But if you start bringing it too high without a specific purpose, yeah, you can easily be accused of becoming a banker and taking people's tax money in advance for something that you might spend. And that's why I think it's appropriate for us, once we knew the assumptions changed, to lower the tax levy in that area. Same thing for the liability fund. You want to have it to cover potential claims in the future, but if you don't have specific claims, I don't think it's quite right to take taxpayers' money thinking something that might go wrong unless I have a specific knowledge of something. So drawing down on those levies, I think, drawing down on those reserves was the appropriate thing to do. Drawing down on the reserve reduces the amount of taxes we're taking and in a sense provides the tax relief.
This is a question for you. So we've lost $500,000 with the Harris going land base and the potential $1 million on Maristar. Do you have nothing?
Any sense of whether
Yeah.
Maristar is gonna go land-based?
Yeah.
I think they have issues, potentially with the fact that I don't know they have the square footage land available to do that, but
Okay.
My purpose in putting in there was not to indicate Ameristar's plans one way or another. I don't know what they're going to do. You know, they know their business and they'll do what they want to do, but it was to alert all of you as well as staff that there are potential changes that can reduce our revenue in the future. There's some obvious ones that we've seen happening. What happens when you go land-based? There's some potential ones. The automatic traffic enforcement fees, and there's also some that will go with the national economy. I think the likely reduction in cable franchise fees is a real possibility as we watch that industry consolidate and watch it shift. And oil and gas prices have been all over the place. Relying on a franchise fee from that to maintain itself at a consistent level, I think, is a mistake. So it's kind of my way of saying, be prepared because things could change quickly. It's also part of justifying why that reserve projected for next year is at the $24 to $25 million level, because there are some things that could change quickly for us, and we would have some time to react without putting ourselves in a liquidity crisis, but we want to be prepared and at least be thinking about things.
If I could piggyback, come back to that reserve fund question. Note in your chart under tab 4 that the total of the reserve funds has shrunk by about $6.5 million during the current fiscal year. So that's all the funds taken together. So, so based upon what you're saying before, given the totality and how you break down each fund, that doesn't necessarily cause you any concern.
Well, it doesn't cause me concern because I know the major components that are bringing it down $6 million, and I'll share those with you, so that you can not have maybe allay the concerns a little bit.
Well, and I am most interested in the employee benefit fund, so if you wanted to go through some of those again, by all means.
Well, we are gonna see about a 6% reduction in our fund balances this year. And over half of that, $3.1 million is settlement in the Harrington McGee thing. That's out there, it's real. In terms of the sewer fund, I'm projecting that expenses will exceed revenue by about $1 million, perhaps a little more. So now we're up to $4.1 million of the $6 million. In capital projects, we're gonna spend a little bit more than we take in. Capital projects are one of those things where we're approving it as they go, and the timing of the expenditure is when you can do the project. In terms of the employee benefit fund, a year ago we had said that we want to reduce the balance in that fund by over $1 million. And so what we did was we knew what retirement benefits, insurance benefits, Social Security, we knew what that was going to cost us. And I think it was in the $13.5 million to $14 million range. And we said we're only going to tax for about, it was in the $14.5 million range. We said we're only going to tax for $13 million of it to draw down the fund. So that again was one of those things where we knew the expenses would exceed revenue. It would lower our fund balances, but in a way it was providing tax relief.
Okay.
It's like if I have $100 in my billfold, and I say to my, in the upcoming year, I know I'm going to have expenses of $200. If I'm going to have expenses of $200, and I know that I can always go to somebody to say, reimburse me. When I spend that $200 in this year, I started with 100. Shall I go to the person that's going to reimburse me, or shall I say give me 200 because that's what I spent, or do I say give me 150 because I don't need to carry $100 around anymore? I only need to carry 50. That's the example of what's happened this year and next year in the employee benefits fund.
Part of that was the police and fire retirement fund, and part of it was health insurance came in less than.
There's three components that really helped us this year. The police and fire coming in at, we had been projecting 40% contributions in 15 and 16, and now they're talking more like 30%. Good news for that. We had projected that we would spend $1.6 million in workers' compensation because we basically said, what would the premiums cost us? Let's budget for that. If we have more favorable experience, we don't spend as much. Our experience was that we only spent $1.2 million. We're projecting only to spend $1.2 million. So we have some savings there as well. That's why we felt we didn't need to maintain the reserves quite as high.
Okay. Well, perhaps I'm just not reading your chart on levy rates correctly on the next page, because the line for 2014 for benefit levy, it looks as though that the levy was actually higher for the current fiscal year than it was for next year, or what's projected for next year.
Yes, that is the case.
Okay.
And why is it? Why is it high? Your question is, why is it lower next year?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, if the levy rate was actually higher last year, why do we end up with a reduced balance? And you provided part of that explanation
because
before.
the spending was actually higher than the taxes took in for us.
Okay. So I had some follow-up questions
Okay.
about that based upon where we think we'll be headed, because now if we're reducing the levy rate, then where do you expect that balance to be next year? Because I did note that the spending was considerably higher last year.
I expect the balance at the end of 2015 in that fund to be just under $2 million.
Okay,
Down from the $3.5 million that we're projecting this year, down from the $4.5 million that it was on July 1st of 2013.
okay.
And
Because my whole intent behind this is not to challenge it, it's just to make sure that we have provided enough cushion that if the unforeseen happens and things turn south, that we have enough of a reserve to make sure that our public safety personnel are covered.
I would say that $2 million is about as low as you want to go. I would say that next year, that we need to start, next year, I think, and when you're looking at budgeting 2016, I think the actual cost of benefits, the totals for retirement, insurance, and Social Security, that's probably what you're gonna have to assess for on the employee benefits fund. And that's what we had done in the past. If the biggest reason for reducing it this year was the idea that some of the assumptions had changed, and B, we needed to take some tax relief because of what happened in the tort and liability fund. It's like kind of like a confluence of those two incidences coming together. Had we not taken the big hit on tort and liability fund, I might have said keep the balance at $2.5 million rather than $2 million. And see what happens. It's
So it's a calculated risk, but you expect that position to improve?
yes,
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the rainy day fund is the general fund.
it is. The interesting thing is on the general fund, there will be some people who will look at what how many days we reserve for and what that percentage is, and they'll say, we want you to reserve just for general fund expenses. So if my general fund expenses are in the $50 to $60 million range, and I said I wanted to keep 20% of that, people would say, well, then you should have $12 to $13 million in your fund. I take the approach of I want the general fund reserve to be 20% of all of our spending, because if we do have big challenges to our economy, it's not just general fund coming through property taxes that are going to decline. We'll see sales tax dollars start to dry up a little bit. We'll see user fees start to dry up a little bit. We'll see the state, through its road use tax fund, maybe hang on to that money before we should. And if we still want to keep spending in those areas because we want to keep things going on, we need to have reserves to take care of 2 or 3 months of all the funds revenue, not just general funds. So that's the reason I'm kind of an advocate of keeping it in the 20% of total expenditures, not just general fund expenditures.
And those type of philosophies cause our bonding rate to be where it is today, which is low, so.
Yeah, there's, keeping that fund balance where it was the last couple of times has been responsible for maintaining the AA2 rating that it increased to, I think, in 2010. They feel our reserves are adequate. They also have generally felt that by achieving our plans and being able to explain why we're budgeting the way we are, that we're in control of the situation. That has helped as well. And I always go back, I hate to go back to 3 years ago, but having those reserves there made a little bit of a difference in 2011 too.
Just curious, since we are still talking about benefit
Sure.
funds, the insurance has just gone up so much, just like everybody else's, but I'm looking, and I don't know what page it is in here because I did it on the ref ago, but on your chart, it looks like you're budgeting for, 2.6 million to 2.6.5 million for 2015 for insurance. Is that,
Well, are you talking about,
that's what I'm trying to understand, is
Okay.
that property insurance, or is that the employee insurance? Let's say it would be on,
The health insurance is in the back section, and it is, let's see, page E40. I'm sorry, I lied to you. It's not E40.
I'm on 42 of 50 in your explanation.
Trying to find the HR page.
By the way, while you're looking, were these additional pages that you provided posted?
Yes.
For the public?
Yeah, I put the,
Okay.
Rich got those in there Friday afternoon. I'm projecting next year that our insurance costs will be about $7.3 million for employee benefits, for employee health insurance benefits, for the, and that's a no change from this current year. While we saw charges go up for Affordable Care Act administration fees and that sort of thing, our self-insurance portion of the plan did well enough that the overall plan, the overall premium is not going up. And of that $7.3 million, 89% is employer paid, 11% is employee paid. And 7 point,
Area that had grown so much every year, so it's kind of nice to see it
Pleasant.
settle.
well, I was programming in a 4% increase initially through, right through the end of January. That was what we had in there. And then Ellen came back from a conference in, I want to think it's the same weekend that this book came out, and said it's not changing. So we adjusted it back a little bit, which actually made it easier. I didn't have to explain why we were losing $2 million instead of just explaining why we're going down $1.5 million. But for a while it also made it a little easier to set the tax levy at a no increase. It was an interesting first 5 or 6 weeks on the job working with Matt, because he got on the job and I sent him a preliminary memo saying I think we can get the levy down to 1820, and then I followed up about 2 weeks later and I said, well, maybe we can keep it under 18. And then when we were getting ready for the books to go out, we discussed our various options. We had, because there were really, there's a few places where you can take it to make this a plan that can accomplish a couple different things. We felt the best thing was not to increase taxes, not to increase the tax rate, but increase the funds and we cut out a couple expenses at the end that we felt could be pushed off a year or two in some of the operational areas to come in with a plan that would work for everybody.
Initially talked about not increasing the tort liability levy and decided that it made sense if we could keep a flat levy to build that up a little bit.
The other thing that's kind of interesting about our process, we don't sit there, we don't say we think that 1% or 2% is your increased spending for next year. I haven't worked that way, and the department heads really work well as looking at their plans, and basically the approach is, the first question we ask is, do we have any major changes in how we plan to do things next year? And if the answer is yes, then we say, have we quantified that? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we build it into the budget. If the answer to that is no, we haven't quantified it yet, we don't build it into the budget yet. Perfect example, tonight Larry was talking about Hannafin Park and operations and fees. If somebody had said, do you have those fees built into the budget, I'd say no, because we haven't determined it yet. So I only budget things that we're sure of, that we can do, because otherwise, if we make a guess and we're off, we're going to be explaining to you why we guessed wrong in the first place. Okay, then we say, okay, with the scope of services that we want to provide, how's our staff to do it? And everybody projects their staff, and we establish what that's going to cost. Send the staffing levels back to the department heads. Did I capture what you wanted? The answer to that is yes, it gets built in. Then we say, project what you need with that staff for your other expenses. Don't just add percentages. You know, it does, you look at our budget, sometimes you'll see 3-year budgets where one year it's 100, next year it's 102, and next year it's 104. You can, okay, so they're going up 2%. We don't do it that way. People tell us what they need specifically. If they give me a dollar amount and I don't know what's in it, they explain what's in it. That gets put in. Now we have all of the building blocks, and we say, can the projected revenue handle this? Can the projected tax revenue handle this? And if it can't handle it, we go back and say we need to look at this or this. As I said, this year, I think there was only 1 or 2 items like that. Then we say, can the levy handle it? And is it in accordance with the long-range planning that we have for the direction that we want to take this? If the answer is yes, then the mayor and I get together and we talk about where the rates could be. We settle all of that, and then we bring it to you. So that's the process. It's not just hitting a button on a computer. It's not just adding a percentage increase. Certainly isn't driven by me. It's a collaborative effort with department heads to make sure that they get their input. They're in a sense saying, this is what I think it costs me to provide the services. My job is to say is 2 things. Are they reasonable, and do they fit in with what the plan is for the city?
Well, back to the employee benefits, if we could. One of the reasons why I appreciate the amount of detail that you put into these packages, and why we have an opportunity to have these public discussions, is that most people are not aware of how our friends in Des Moines drive contributions to retirement and benefits packages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's.
And so having said that, you're pretty much given a bill that you have to pay regardless, and then you have to work in the margins to make sure that you can pull all the financing of that together.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have on the retirement plan. We have no discretion over that. We have people in IPERS, we have people in police and fire, and everybody is in Medicare, and most of the people are in Social Security. We have no say over that. If we hear from taxpayers and we hear from council that we want to work within these constraints, if those expenses go up, it basically means we have to look at something else. So there are a lot of what we have is spelled out for us, and we do work on the fringes, as you said.
So I brought that up in order to ask, are you aware of anything? Have you heard of anything on the horizon from our friends in Des Moines that might change calculations in the near future?
Well, 2 things on the 411. There was a bill that was introduced. I don't think it went very far, that would have created presumptions for infectious diseases, that they would be work-related. I think that died, or I think that's not going anywhere this year. That would have increased our costs again without having a say in it. The other side is there's always still some sort of thought that the state will begin to fund its portion of the 411 that was in the original bill. I don't think that's.
Pigs will not fly anytime soon?
I don't think that's going to happen anytime this year. I think that, at the board meeting where the police and fire retirement system talks to all the cities, Representative Vanderlinden on the House side was saying that it's difficult for the House majority to pass anything without seeing some efforts at cost reform from the plan. And Senator Danielson was indicating that he's open to some reform, but needed to bring something from the House. I won't say that there wasn't a spirit of cooperation, but it sounded like it would be difficult based on what was being talked about then.
This week, maybe the talk was that they didn't supplement IPers, and so they weren't gonna supplement 411.
Well, if I, maybe if I was gonna suggest any reform, it would be that both employer and employee have a consistent contribution that stays where the ratio stays the same. I think IPERS has that. I'm not sure the other plan does. That would be some sort of reform, but there are so many components to that issue that I'm not gonna be able to solve it tonight or any other time soon.
I just wanted to make sure that we were able to mitigate against any potential surprise, since we're required to submit our budget
Oh,
for
no.
the end of the legislative session.
15's not gonna happen. I mean, there's not gonna be any changes that'll impact our 2015 budget.
Very good.
I have one more question.
Sure.
On the dues and subscriptions, I looked obviously closer at the city clerk budget, because we sort of control that. Is that, it seems significantly higher than other departments, that and legal. Is that legal notices, or what subscription, is that what that pays for? Okay.
That's
So the title's sort of misleading. I thought, what are we subscribing to? With 10 grand a year?
every newspaper in Iowa, so we can look at properties for sale.
The stacks of magazines. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
I unfortunately have a very long list of questions. I don't know if we need a potty break at some point, or a back brace for you, but
I'll start marshaling through and let's see where we get.
fair enough. Intergovernmental revenue. Turning to tab 7, page B4, you list various categories, since this is a relatively new thing, and four different categories of backfills. Was that distribution developed, is that kind of prescribed at the state level, or is that something that?
Yeah, that's part of the Iowa Department of Management, the budget package that they have for us. That's built off, that's driven by the property values that we input, and then driven by the amount of levy rate that we have in each of the taxes. So that is driven by the Iowa Department of Management
So
formulas.
that will go back to backfill these individual funds that we discussed ad nauseum before.
Yeah, but by the property, it's by having a 5% reduction in commercial property tax values, the estimate is this is what the state will give us in year 1 to make up for that.
Yep. Understand. Okay, turning to tab 5, I guess it would be the 10th page under tab 5. There's under intergovernmental, there's 5 different revenue sources identified. I'm sorry, wrong question. I note under re-estimated for year 2012 for intergovernmental. For 2014, there's a whole lot of zeros in there where numbers were provided for the other fiscal years, and everything went in under local grants and reimbursements. Is there story there, or just fat fingering the data entry, or?
Trying to find intergovernmental. I'm sorry.
It would be on revenues detail fiscal year ending 2015.
Yeah, I should have spread that out more. I was putting in the amount, but it should have been spread out to road use tax and to, you got the total in one line. It didn't get
Yeah.
distributed.
Okay, just thought that was a slight omission. On tab 7, page B5, we start talking about goods and services revenue. And major sources of revenue on this page come from everything from refuse collection to sewer fees to greens fees and whatnot. Total fees were projected to rise about $1 million overall. That's about 6.18%. About 1/3 of that was due to come from Mid-America Center. Is that projection for the Mid-America Center based upon hard commitments, or is there a little bit of speculation involved in that, or?
That was based off of their estimates for what their activity would be for this year, and that was based on having a number of concerts this year in fiscal 15 that they have not had in fiscal 14.
Okay. So I would think that most of that revenue under this category, goods and services, that there's no way to scientifically project we're going to get X amount, so.
Well, some of them are more scientific than others. I mean, in terms of refuse, for example, we can take the number of customers times, what are we charging now, $8 a week, a month? 18. Okay, you know, we can go fee times number of customers, estimate for growth. It's a lot of that has been done in some of the areas. Others are less scientific. It's difficult to project always the sewer fees. We projected them at $5 million because last year they were $4,952,000, and we said they'd be approximate. That's a little more difficult.
And that Mid-America Center number is a net fee revenue, right? There are expenses that get offset against that, or
Well, now we're trying to report all of the
is it
fees.
combined?
Yeah, we don't, you know, we'll report ticket sales as revenues, and we'll report cost of the event as an expense rather than netting it. That just provides a little greater reporting.
So, again, on that million, that's the fees and not a net number
For,
for Mid-America Center.
no, that's the expected revenue
Yeah.
from everything.
Okay, you mentioned sewer rates. Returning to that for a moment, and it comes up under page B5. You noted earlier on under tab 2, you said, let's see, quote, in upcoming year, the city needs to conduct a rate study to implement changes to its sewer fees, or the operation will continue to raise money. We've discussed that here already. This is the single greatest revenue challenge. My question for you is for that item noted on B5, does that 6.38% increase in the sewer use fees noted on that page, does that reflect those anticipated changes?
No, it does not, because again, we don't know what the, you know, back to that certainty principle, if we don't know what we're raising them to, I'd much rather project what they are based on the current rate structure, and then when a rate study is done, and we know the impact that it would have on our fees, then we do a budget amendment for the impact of the rate study.
So the rate study will be to consider potential further revenue increases beyond what's already in this budget.
The one thing I'd caution you on, that the 6.38, the percentage change is this year's budget over last year's budget. Last year's budget we were doing in, well, January of 13. We estimated that our sewer revenue would be $4.7 million for fiscal 14. Well, we know that in 13 it was $5 million. So in a sense that the budget for 14 is probably lower than what it actually turned out to be. We're actually doing better than we had budgeted. Good news, good news. And so the rise, the 5 million actual, or the 5 million that we're budgeting in 15 probably is going to be about the same as what we actually see for this year.
Okay.
I just didn't have enough to say change that budgeted amount to $5 million to be the same as last year. But I felt it was close enough that it didn't need an adjustment.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that when we reconsider this rate study in March, it'll be towards a view of further increasing rates, just the fees charged to users.
Just that we have not increased rates since 2005.
Yeah, I understand. I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, it's not two
correctly.
jumps. We're not doing a 6% jump now for one reason or another. It's just how the estimates worked out.
It's a year-to-year budget comparison, and last year we budgeted 4.7, which we would have done before 2013 came in. It came in at 404,000 4,952,000, and so this year he's budgeting 5 million, so. It's not a fee increase, it's just an adjustment in the.
I was gonna look and see where we are this year through 7 months. Sorry. We're, through half the year, we're at $2.4 million, so we're in the range that'll get us to 4.8, so.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere between 4.7, 4 and 5 million is where we'll end up.
Okay,
I'm not
I just
sure.
wanted to make sure that I and other people understood what we would be asked to possibly consider in March with a new study on this.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think it's gonna be much further out than March when you actually get proposed rates. I think that.
March is the engineering agreement.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
okay. But there will be a study obviously on this.
Several months.
Because under the current situation, at least the last 2 years, and maybe longer than that, while the revenues have gone up, the expenses have gone up, and we, on sewer, lose money. 700,000, is that ballpark?
Well, I think closer to $1 million.
And again, I understand, we're not raising the levy fees in this budget, but one's wallet doesn't care whether you're paying a levy or a service fee, it's still coming out of the wallet. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on what we would be possibly considering at a later point in time.
One of the more interesting thing about it being rate versus taxes is all the users of the sewer system pay it if it's coming out of a user fee versus property. You know, what I'm saying is there's certain tax exempt institutions that you still use the sewer, and by having closer to all of the real costs being covered by sewer fees, we're getting all the users of the system to pay for it, not just the taxpayers. I'm not, you know, I'm just.
Understand. To continue this theme on fees, I guess turn slightly to the question of fines. Your tab 2, I think it's some discussion about red light cameras on page 5 of tab 4. We have some numbers for fines and red light cameras, whatnot. Tab 7 of page B6. It appears that in addition to $75,000 in court fines being budgeted to increase, we'll also see another $46,000 in red light camera fines. So I just want to be clear that we are budgeting under the prospect that there will be increased violations of the law.
No, but this is another one where our budget last year was not where we're going to certainly exceed what we budgeted last year in terms of red light fees. We're running about $75,000 a month now, maybe even a little higher. All of the cameras are restored and operational again. And the $900,000 that we're budgeting for next year really relied on two big assumptions. And the first is that our system for automated traffic enforcement will be deemed acceptable by the Iowa Department of Transportation, and we'll have the same number of cameras operating now, and basically the same violation and collection factor as we have now. So that's where the $75,000 a month came from, what we're currently experiencing.
Well, and that's one that's very much controlled by the user.
Yeah.
You know, it could if everybody quit running the red lights, that would definitely
Well,
change that number.
one of the historical problems with that line item is that as road work was done, cameras were shut down.
Right.
And so now all those cameras, as Art said, are back up, and so we're seeing accurate information.
We're seeing fully operational.
Plus, we have more cameras now than we did a few years ago. We added We added some.
Went from 7 to 13, is that right, Greg? Yeah.
Oh, that was older then, okay, never mind. Seems like it was just yesterday.
We're not budgeting on expectation of more lawbreakers, we're budgeting on real-life experience.
Well, under tab 2, you address threats to overall revenue. You say, quote, "Red light cameras are budgeted to provide $9,000 in revenue to the city's general fund in FY 2015. So maybe this is just an unfortunate phrase, but that's a threat to revenue?
The threat is that they could go away. That's the threat.
Okay. So it is being seen as a source of revenue.
It is a source of.
Well, it is a source, factually, it's a source of revenue.
Okay.
We're not going after it to make money, it's just that money comes to the city because people speed.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the words have meaning, so that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay.
I guess the amplification that I'd provide to that is, it's a source of revenue just in the very nature that it's money coming into us, from somebody. Is it a source of revenue that we're relying upon for our operations? The answer to that is no. If that $900,000 stopped today, if it went to zero, we would be able to still carry out our budget and have enough resources to find, to get through the year.
Well, and I think it's incumbent upon me to point out that when those red light cameras were discussed, it was very specific by this body that it was not being done as a source of revenue, it was being done as a public safety feature. The ancillary effect is, in order to reinforce appropriate behaviors, is done with a fine system, and that is revenue, and so it is a source of revenue. It's not, red light cameras are not intended to be created as a source of revenue, but rather a public safety feature, and we did many things at that time to make sure that it wasn't a source of revenue, like the countdown timers at those intersections, like publishing where those intersections were.
Moving them from time to time, that's a difficult thing to do, but.
Well, and the revenue that is received is reinvested into public safety. We're not using it to,
Well, it goes into the
know,
general
buy-
fund, so it
Well,
can
but
be
didn't
used
we-
for
didn't we
anything,
designate?
but,
That's
I thought that we did.
well, there is a goal of using at least a third of that amount for equipment for
The police department,
public safety.
yeah.
Well,
And public works.
And one of the uses this year was the grid for the traffic cameras, and that one of the uses that you just requested, a secondary.
Oh, fiber optic.
Yeah, secondary redundancy.
Redundancy, taking everything to op center.
That's what I thought we were doing. I mean, I know it went into the general fund, but we would at least know what's coming in and earmark that for particular public safety expenses.
We've used it for
Equipment, right?
defibrillator.
Yeah.
So that piggybacks well then in my question, because I was going to ask whether or not that these particular fines had been earmarked. And I had a question as with other fines, say for instance, if the building inspection office issues a citation that results in a fine, do those funds go back into general revenues, or are those also fenced?
Those are in the general fund, so they can be used for any
Even to the
city
extent of
purpose.
the library fee.
Great.
I just want to provide some numbers because I think this is significant. In the fiscal year ending 2013, we spent $262,908 on equipment for public safety arising from red light revenue. And so far in the first 7 months of 2014, we spent $350,000 $56. So over $600,000 in the last 19 months of the red light revenue was spent on equipment, you know, specifically that would not have been purchased. So we've improved our operations and improved safety in any number of ways.
Yeah, I
because
think
of
that
that.
is the point too. If those revenues go down, there's some expenditures that just wouldn't be made.
Wouldn't
They're
happen
made,
yet.
right, because that money is being used for public safety, things we couldn't have done, so.
Couple of comments that I had heard when we were in this budgeting process, as well as once it was for the most part completed, well, came from the police department, and it was, we have the sense now that we have the equipment we need to do our job. You know, we don't feel like we're operating from behind. And I'm not saying that it all came through the red light revenue, but it's the attitude that if there is something that we think we can do to do our job well, there's the feeling that they can send it up the line through the department, and when it gets to Todd or Scott or to Ralph, if they look at their budget and say, I don't have anything here, but it's something that I think really can help us, there's that other avenue they can look at. And that's why I think they have the flexibility and the feeling like they can suggest improvement. So not only the dollar standpoint, but the attitudinal standpoint that I'm not locked into a spreadsheet or a set of numbers. That's a flexibility that revenue gives us that doesn't always easily get communicated, but it's there.
So if we put cameras everywhere, we can get rid of the general levy?
Oh, I don't put those words in my mouth. I'm a Senate candidate. I don't want to get in trouble.
I just think it's nice because it's one that the individual controls. It's not a cost put on them by anybody but themselves, so it's gonna make sense.
And I've always said, now this isn't part of the budget thing, but I've been to so many other communities around the country that are using it, and I see changed behaviors there too. I never thought people would ever stop for stoplights in LA, but they do now because they have fines. Ready?
Turning to, again, to threats to revenue, you wisely point out, but your narrative in tab 2, note that property tax backfill is by no means guaranteed. Then go on to say that real growth will need to occur in the community if basic goods and services are to be maintained at current levels. What do you mean by real growth? Real growth in what?
Well, I think investment in property, investment in businesses, investment in homes, whether it's.
So that assumes that the economy is growing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if our economy nationally or regionally undergoes a period of languish, and we've seen this continued up pressure on expenses, how else do you expect us to be able to grow those revenues needed to match those requirements?
What's lost in property taxes in future years?
Has to go on.
I'm sorry, Sharon?
If we don't get growth, it's like we tried to tell them before they
Yeah.
passed the law, it's gonna end up on residential, and that's the worst thing I can imagine having happen, so we have to push for economic development.
I think the economic development is there, and the interesting thing is that it doesn't all go on to residential, though. I mean, the costs that we can levy directly for the costs on, the debt service fund, the employee benefits fund, tort and liability, they all will serve to increase residential. And that's about half of the property tax bill. The other side of the general fund, airport levy, transit levy, those are pretty much capped. And those can't go up, so if and we're getting into, speculation here, if we don't have the growth, that would result in some capping of costs, basically, so we'd either be operating at the same or lower costs, and, Does that mean reducing expenses? Does that mean not doing things that we used to do? Does it impact positions? Could be any number of those things, but, you know, certainly premature to say any
And
one.
that leads me to my next question, and that is, you know, of course, families well understand that, you know, when they have expenses exceeding their paychecks, they have to provide for those initial, absolutely essential budget items like property taxes, water bills, garbage bills, income taxes, all those things that if you don't pay, your house is gone, or
Utility
you need
bills,
to
you know,
haul
it goes
off,
dark.
whatnot. So obviously then the family has to make adjustments in its budget. So what are the procedures that we have? What studies have we undertaken, or are we prepared to take in order to address potential cost savings?
We haven't looked at anything specific to that. It's a situation where I believe that our reserve level is sufficient enough to get us through to, it's sufficient enough to get us through at least 1 year of difficulty. If we're looking at a decline in backfill, that's at least 2 or 3 years out. There's not a framework set in place now that has us looking at operations 3 and 4 years out. So there's not anything specific I could tell you right now that has been done to say this is what we would do if revenues decline by 20% or 30%.
Basically, you've got two choices. You can cut costs, or you can increase the levy. And I know in my tenure as a councilman, we've sat here and laid people off.
I think 05 and 07, I think you had those situations. And sometimes you move people into funds where you could levy for them. They might have gone from a general fund employee to a
I guess
fund
that's what I'm
employee.
asking. Are there contingency procedures, you know, like in the military, we had to go through manpower studies, there were yearly budget drills where we had possible contingencies. What would we do to adjust if those contingencies took place?
Well, no, as I mentioned, the very first part of our budgeting process is we look at the operations that we have. And if we were challenged with revenues, we would begin not necessarily to look at expenses to cut. We wouldn't look at necessarily at areas to raise taxes. We would start looking at our individual services and prioritizing them and say, is this essential? Is this desired? Is this superfluous? We'd look at each of our operations and say, where is it on the scale of priorities? And the stuff that is most essential would certainly be maintained. The stuff that is superfluous or the nice to haves of the world, we'd look at how much should we fund them? You know, should funding be reduced? I think there's always in the back of our mind, whether it's in an annual budget or whether it's in response to a certain challenge, there's always the question of how bad, what's the value of this service to the public? We ask that at the start of each budget session. We haven't looked at it in terms of it being an action that we would take in response to a really severe fiscal challenge, but we do know how to conduct the process and be able to set priorities and say sometimes we go without this. To some degree, we do it now at the last part of the budget when we'll look at items that may not need to be done this year. You know, they get deferred. In a time when there's real threats, they may not be deferred. They may be tossed. So that's how we would change.
It's an oversimplification, but in order to spend down that 20% reserve, it would mean the property values would have to drop by 20% in 1 year, and that's nothing that's ever happened.
Well, I was going to suggest, you know, that we talked before about the budget pain was undergone with the fiscal crisis back in 2008. No one really foresaw that. And you were talking to this concept, it really goes to the idea of risk management. So that's what I was really asking about is there a longer range view so that you don't have short-term make decisions that are painful, if not expensive, to go back and undo, such as personnel layoffs. And once you let experience walk out the door, it's hard to get back.
That's the reserve.
That's,
Okay.
That's the contingency plan.
in a sense,
Okay. That's my answer.
Well, just like my contingency plan, I've got money in the bank. If something goes wrong, I've got an amount of money that will
Rainy day
sustain
fund.
it. Until if I were to lose my job, I could sustain myself for X amount of time until I find other employment.
But I also have priorities on what gets paid first, what gets cut out, what gets unplugged, that sort of thing. So-
and we have, I mean, we're prepared to honor the contracts. I mean, that's the first thing. If we're gonna always pay our principal and interest. We're not gonna default. That would probably be the highest priority that I would have, even before. Yeah, that would be my highest priority, and then we'd look at each of the 7 functional areas. Public safety would, and they almost go right down in order of when we list them. Public safety is first, public works, public health, those 3 areas I think need to be maintained, and they're the highest on the list when we look at functional areas. Those would probably have the highest priorities. When we get down to, beyond that, recovering from a problem, you need community and economic development, that would be next. Culture and recreation comes into play. Capital's lowest on the list, and that makes sense because you have a situation where you don't have the funds unless you absolutely need something to operate. You can come back to that when things get good again. General government, that actually is the next to lowest in the list of functions, and it's probably where the most discretion comes.
Suffice it to say, it's easy to grow a budget. It's very painful to shrink it.
Well, it presents interesting challenges, but it's also one of those things where we're always, and I don't know if I'm revealing something here or not, but it's one of those things, human nature says, we always assume things are gonna get better. At worst, we say, at least they'll be the same. Very often do we try to advance through things saying it's gonna get worse. It's not to say we shouldn't do it, and I believe that's the point you're making. We always want to advance, we always want to work to make things better, but have an eye that, let's be prepared if the undesirable happens.
Art, I thank you for your patience and diligence.
You're welcome. This is the last budget I'll ever do. I did my first one in 1984, and I've been doing them for over 30 years.
You might get help in the early formation of next year's budget.
Well, I'll do what I can.
May not be completely off the hook.
I guess that's all I'll say on that. It's a good group of people to work with.
Start
Thanks,
budgeting in
Art.
September next year.
There you go.
And I can say that with all the work Art has done over the years, that whoever does step in to do this has got an incredible roadmap to start with, and won't have to create so much stuff from the beginning, because he's set out so much good policies and procedures on this.
Yeah, and we fully intend to seek his replacement in adequate enough time so that we can tap into that history and knowledge. So.
What I like is, and it started with Scott Sanders, the budget became infinitely easier to read with the way it was broken down, the way it was presented, the charts and the graphs, and, I mean, it's just, budgets aren't the most fun document to read, but you certainly have made it easier for all of us. Thank you.
I did have many more pages of questions
Well,
to ask.
please,
However,
yeah, please.
I don't want to inflict undue pain, so
you're fine,
with your deference, what I can do in alternative is I can pose the questions in writing for the staff. They primarily go to the amount of volatility in some accounts from year to year, and I'm just looking for some better understanding as to the reasons for that volatility, and I can address those to the individual department heads later on.
I think that's a good question, and it speaks to a couple things. We don't just say we're gonna build expense after this, we're not, I mentioned earlier, some places I'll add 2% every year. One of the things we have done in a lot of the areas is we'll do something special this year, knowing it's a once every 5 year sort of thing. And that's why you do see some lines where they're way up and then come back down. That's a good observation, and all those questions, we'll certainly be able to provide you the details and the understanding as to why that happens.
And we have adequate time to wait 2 more weeks to pass this budget. Is correct, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't have to pass the budget
Yeah,
tonight.
so
It
if
can
you've
be.
got questions, let's delay it for 2 weeks and let you get your questions answered.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Is that what we're gonna do?
When I walked up the stairs, someone said, Al's got a bunch of questions. I said, perfect, because that's what it's about.
Yep, and I do appreciate that your patience, and the staff has worked with me in detail to get the new guy this information. And I just want to make sure that if a simple guy like me can understand what's going on, then hopefully a lot of the public is also going to understand, and that's going to build that level of confidence.
Oh, it's always been the goal, make sure somebody understands why we're spending it. That's what it's all about.
My wife keeps after me about that whole concept, so.
Any other questions on the public hearings?
So are we delaying that then? Is that what we're doing?
What's that?
Are we delaying that budget then? No.
Go-
Yeah, I don't know what,
You can go ahead and start it and then continue it on to the next meeting.
I don't think there's any rush, and I don't pretend to tell this body how to vote, but I think that if Al has additional questions or somebody else does, let's get the questions answered, so.
If, since people may be coming tonight in anticipation of the public hearing, we can all, by all means,
Yeah,
have
just,
that.
you can just extend the public hearing for 2 more weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can occur at both times. That sounds agreeable to me.
fair enough.
Yep.
I mean, after the public hearing, can't you just send it for third reading?
Well, it's not an ordinance, but it's just continue the hearing.
Oh, just leave it open then? Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
You bet. Anything on B or C in the public hearings? Anything on ordinance first reading?
I had a question on that.
Kim, can you come up to the front just I don't know if everybody's had a chance to meet Kim. She runs the purchasing department for the city and helped on this ordinance, so if you haven't had a chance to meet her, either introduce yourself tonight or stop down there sometime. It's pretty interesting, what they do and do very well, so.
I just had a question, just to make certain I understood it. It would appear that the main change would be if there were, apart from adding services to the list of items, but the one I really wanted to address is, it looks like particularly under proposed 1.32040, and I think that's on page 125 electronically, if that helps folks. It looks like if something, as I understand current policy, if a purchase is over 25,000, it has to come to the council. Let's take, for example, most trucks, certainly Public Works would be buying, I would assume would come over that cap. And if I understand correctly, the proposed change would be if, so long as it fell within a budgeted line item, it wouldn't have to come to the council. Is that right, or am I misunderstanding?
As long as it falls within a budgeted line item and it's the lowest bid, that's correct. And that was actually brought about, the one other study session that I've been to, a council member's comment was, are these trucks because something broke down, or is this something we've already approved in the budget?
See.
And that's up to the council members to decide, do you want to see every budgeted item if it's the lowest bid amount, or do you only want to see them if we're not choosing the lowest bid?
I appreciate that clarification, and I'm personally.
And it says if you're not choosing the lowest bid, it comes
Sure.
before this body.
Sure.
Correct.
That's automatic, right?
And I'm conflicted both ways. I certainly don't want to micromanage, and at the same time, it can be difficult. I certainly readily admit I'm more of a person who loves letters as opposed to numbers. So it can sometimes be hard for me when I look at the overall budget to know, because of course, in a budget year, there's no way, and I'm certainly not implying there is, that we could ever anticipate exactly what we'll need. Let me just stick with trucks, because that's one I think I certainly can understand anyway, I think. And we won't know how many, and we certainly don't know how much they're gonna cost. So we set an overall cap, if you will. This is how much we're gonna spend. But then when it happens, there's part of me that thinks, I don't wanna micromanage, but there's also part of me that thinks, if we prove the overall number, but then will it still be reported to us? I mean, the only concern I have is, to the degree it's on autopilot where it makes sense, I certainly couldn't be against that, but if it's, there's certain things that I think that the buck, to use the phrase, buck has to stop with the council for good and bad. I just think for accountability's sake as well, and so that there's consensus and there's discussion. And I didn't know if when drafting this, I've got to assume that became part of the discussion. I didn't know what staff's recommendation was, and maybe if some of the departments have some thoughts.
Sure,
Love
if
to hear
anyone
it.
wants to chime in, that's
Yeah.
fine. And expenses are definitely something I know you see on the budget, but if you'd want to see anything accepted via bid that I could submit, you know, for review every 2 weeks. And I'll just give you an example, sticking with the automotive,
Yeah, please.
to put it into perspective. So the way the automotive budgets work, they start with Dave McDermott, the fleet superintendent, and he says, Parks needs these things. This is what I think they're going to cost in the next year. So then Parks gets allocated $150,000 for vehicles, and that's what's approved. So it's really what this is suggesting. It's within the integrity of the director to say, do I still have money allocated in that budget that's been approved by council, you know, under that line item budget, and if not, then it would come to council.
And maybe one of the ways, and I'm just talking out loud so I don't know, just talking it through so I understand it, if you'll go along with me a bit here. Maybe if that were something that comes in a routine report, just so that I'm always mindful that whoever we are, we're certainly, none of us are gonna be here forever. Whoever is here for the residents and the council chairs just has a real sense of that oversight role, not just the passing of the laws, but making certain, and I'm certainly not suggesting that somebody's going to go way off script, so to speak, and start spending money willy-nilly left and right, but there's that check there, just so people, that perception thing, that seems to be my theme today, just so that people don't question things and know, so not only is it appropriate, but it's seen to be that way. Is there some sort of way that could be regularly reported? And then that would certainly, on even like in a listing format, like an Excel spreadsheet, again, I'm just thinking out loud,
Yeah, absolutely.
that might accomplish both those goals?
Yes, a lot of cities post on their websites, not only we've started putting our bids and RFPs online now, but they also have the bid results. In the
Okay.
tab results, you can see who submitted a bid, what they submitted for, and then, you know, if we don't select a lowest bid, what the reasoning behind that was from the department. And that's something that I would definitely like to do.
I think that would go a long way towards my concerns, because again, I don't want to micromanage, and if it's within a budget, but at the same time, I just want to make certain that there's that accountability, especially since I imagine my colleagues face the same thing. When someone comes up to you and asks, well, why did you spend it on this? I don't want my answer to be, I didn't even know we did, you know,
That's
or
completely understandable.
I just some sort of regular. And I really like that idea that the public then could see it too. The more we put out there, I think that's a very good idea in this day and age. It's not to denigrate the Postal Service, but certainly putting online the economy of scale is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I understand that's quite a big change for the council, so that's obviously up to you to decide. It's just a suggestion that
Sure.
has been supported by all the department heads, not only to expedite the process, but just to relieve the council of having to approve a low budget item.
Just so everyone remembers, and I think you do, but when the state auditor was in, this is the result of that suggestion that we put together a policy.
Yep. Yeah, and again, I think that that's, you know, whether that's monthly, I don't know, but some sort of regular basis would alleviate any concern I had just
Sure.
over perception. And I hadn't thought about the fact of the website, so the public could see it at the same time. I think that's a phenomenal idea.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, I think 3H in the consent agenda, your list of bills would give you a list of everything that was purchased in the month of January. So it's after the fact, but it gives you the public notice of what's required. Does that satisfy your need?
Oh, I was just thinking, you know, when we, and again, this will show my ignorance on the topic, but when department heads for the month purchase, let's say on that list, they buy the trucks from dealer X. Do they, is there some sort of internal, maybe this is a question for Art, is there some sort of Public Works, again, I'm not picking on you, spent X this month on that. I assume there's some sort of internal reporting of some kind. Maybe I'm mistaken. Is there a way that we could get that list too? Not that I'm asking, well, we don't kill trees anymore. Not that I'm asking that we create reports to create reports, but if there is one already, can we just get a copy?
Well,
of it?
the cost center statements that we have each month show
Yeah.
the spending for the month and the budget for the year.
Okay.
And if something is going off course,
Yeah.
you'd see it there. And the way that I've always recommended to people to do it is to drill down through the responsibility statements. At the end of 7 months, 58% of the expenses should have been spent throughout the city. If you look and see that there's a director who spent 75% of his or her expenses, you would say, what's wrong in this area? We do it internally before we send the financial statements out, so we know what's happening.
I figured so, yeah.
Couple ways we could assist you in this process. The first might be to prepare a narrative of anything that looks unusual or what we looked at and why that's there. Now that could help the process. The other thing that I wanted to kind of indicate is, and the reason for having this provision saying, let's not, if it doesn't go over budget, we don't seek your approval. Every month we spend $50,000 to Mid-America Energy for streetlights. Do you want to approve that $50,000 expenditure every month?
Sure.
Every month we buy over $25,000 worth of fuel from whomever the approved fuel contractor is for the year. Those are the things we were trying to get away from asking you to approve every month. Maybe a solution around that might be to say that here's a list of vendors who are going to be used every month throughout the year. It's always going to be over 25,000. Maybe we get a bulk of those approved. That's an alternative to this, but I still think this is a better process.
That's very good, by subject, because I assumed we spent a lot, but quite frankly, I didn't know, well, I suppose the number of lights we have, that's probably relatively speak. But that sort of subject thing is kind of nice to know, so that for us, and I imagine folks out there would like to hear. Again, I don't want to create a bunch of extra work, but if it's already reported somehow, I'm not asking you to do it differently, but just maybe we post it.
Yeah, we'll get it up. We'll find a way to.
Okay. That would alleviate any concerns I would have, just, it makes sense otherwise to me.
Great.
I have a question on services. So we're adding services, but we're not adding professional services. What is the difference between services and professional services?
It's defined on here, and the definition used is from the state of Iowa code. And it's,
And my battery just went dead, but
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
before it went dead, I was looking at that again, and you defined professional services, but we're not adding professional services to this change.
correct.
So just for the people at home that don't have this information, what is services?
Services are things such as, like Larry does tree removal service, he bids that out.
Okay,
And under the current ordinance, he really didn't have to bid it out, but he has been.
okay.
So it's services that are provided as a supplement from the city that do not fall under this definition of professional services, which
Okay.
I'd be happy to read.
No, you don't need to read that, because
Okay.
I got that that's engineering and planning and all
Yep.
that. I just wasn't clear on what other services were.
Sure.
So it'd be tree service, maybe cutting weeds down, Don, that kind of thing, picking up trash,
Well, that comes to you.
right?
Temporary labor.
Temporary labor, okay.
Any cleaning service, I know there was a big cleaning bid that went out this past summer. Things like that now would have to be bid out
All right,
under the ordinance.
thanks.
Question on 1.32.080, emergency and negotiated purchases. This allows the mayor to have authority to approve purchases of any amount without advertising or bidding in the case of negotiated purchases. And did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, and a negotiated purchase appears to be defined as a purchase that is warranted when purchasing specialized equipment in order to take advantage of discounts, incentives, or expedited delivery.
Correct.
Gosh, I'm trying to imagine the amount of retail opportunities that don't have retails, rebates, incentives, discounts that are offered out there.
This is more geared towards the definition that I've worked with so far. Negotiated purchases are more like the state of Iowa has a contract with these car companies. You can get this vehicle for this amount, not have to go through the expense of bidding it out because the state of Iowa's already done that.
Okay, so that provides the opportunity then to leverage off of other
Correct.
larger purchase
Correct.
contracts. Okay, very good. So that would probably explain why the threshold for that, well, there is no threshold as opposed to the $25,000 threshold elsewhere in the ordinance,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah. Those are never really taken advantage of unless we've done some research elsewhere and feel that it really is the best cost alternative for the city.
Okay. And when these individual purchases are considered, not necessarily under this category, but just in general, yeah, and I recall a typical tactic that was used in the federal government where purchases or projects are often split in order to come in under those dollar thresholds. How do you all take care that that's not done with impunity?
I'm in the process of updating. There are also purchasing procedures for the city, and I have added serial purchasing as well as a few other definitions into that in order to avoid that from happening.
Okay. And there's also language in here about good faith efforts to obtain bids. So although we no longer require publication in the newspaper, in fact, we don't prescribe any method whatsoever. My question would be, is in the case where we have only one bid, is that by definition the low-cost bidder?
You can only receive one bid, but in this, the good faith effort means you have talked to at least 3 vendors, you've made contact with them. They've told you we're either not interested in making a bid on this, we don't have the time to make a bid. It's more so that than, it's not allowing, it's to validate current practice of, we didn't always have 3 written quotes.
Mm-hmm.
It's to say we made an attempt, we tried to get 3 quotes from
Right.
3 qualified vendors.
Yep.
And one of the things we talked about in those meetings, Al, was that should all those efforts to get bids be published in the paper, and with this new policy and procedure, we just thought the cost was gonna go through the roof if you did that all the time.
Yeah.
And in today's world, there's so many different opportunities to get that out there, we didn't wanna hamstring ourselves.
And I definitely understand that, and I would foresee that there'd be a multitude of purchases that are processed where you only have one bidder that's actually coming in and responding to the advertisement. So I understand.
Yeah, this isn't taking out the requirement of advertising, it's just changing the avenue of advertising.
I didn't see one specified at all, so that kind of allows maximum
Yeah.
latitude.
Which is what we intentionally did.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Other questions on that? Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of the city for your work on this.
If I could go back to item before C, the public hearing. I know last Friday there was some concern raised over the fact that there were no plans and specs in the city's possession as of Friday. under state code at this point, any contract for vertical construction, that's in excess of $130,000, we must have a public hearing on. We can technically comply with that, with the hearing tonight, but the concern is, has the public or anyone else been given an opportunity to actually review these plans and specs? So I talked with Larry, he has no problem if we just go ahead and postpone that public hearing until the next meeting.
Well, and I didn't particularly have an issue with it either. Again, this is a kind of a new guy question where the write-up was for approval to, or approval of plans and specifications in form of contract. I thought, oh my God, we're being asked to approve specifications in form of contract, and I saw that this thing hit City Hall at 10 o'clock this morning. I remembered why I hated contract law. And so I'm wondering if, you know, if all this is already in the CIP and the money has been basically set aside and programmed for this, is this perhaps an added step that really doesn't add value to the process?
We have to have a public hearing, since I think the estimated price is $280,000. We have to have the public hearing. And I guess, like I say, we have it in our possession now. I'm comfortable that if we have the public hearing tonight, we've met the technical requirements of the law. But if there's concern that the public has not had an opportunity to review that document, that we can definitely postpone this without anybody being adversely affected.
So even though the project hasn't, it can't go out for bid until this is basically just notice to the public, we're not actually being asked to approve that. Okay.
What a lot of this process is kind of geared towards when we're especially assessing a project. So if, say, we're planning on doing a street project in somebody's neighborhood, and we're planning on assessing 50% of the cost of that, it gives those people some idea ahead of time how much it's gonna be costing them, and so they can come out to the public hearing and object to it or encourage you to go ahead and pass it. And so it doesn't serve the purpose I think it once did, but it's still a requirement of the law, so.
And my apology to all the trees that had to die for this.
All right, anything under the resolutions?
Have you gotten any feedback from any of the owners down there on the amendment to the Bluffs vision?
Oh, good. Here's a representative of the owner, or the representative.
When we last met on February 10th, we were requesting approval to execute a second amendment to the covenants of Bluffs Vision. At the time, our request was limited to Lot 3 of Bluffs Vision Replat 1. Since the last meeting, we have revised the amendment. I do have copies for each of the members here if we'd like to, for review during the study session or during the break.
That was emailed out to the council
We've got
last
it.
week.
Yeah, we got
by me.
Did you get the, okay,
It
okay,
was
so we
out.
do have that. And so we've also, over the past 2 weeks, it took, the first week was revising the amendment, distributing the amendment. The last amendment was received by a landowner on February 18th. We have since received acceptance from 5 of the 10 landowners totaling 45%. I do have those available here this evening too. Would be the copies of the signed amendment. And with the city approval, we would add approximately 11% to that total. So we'd be around 56% here this evening with the city's approval.
And so the action taken by the council last time was that 65% of the landowners had to vote in favor, is that?
Actually, the council just postponed action.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just.
We
We
talked
talked
about
about
doing
it.
that, yeah.
But that's not what the action is, all right?
No.
Right.
Yeah, and I think
Wasn't the number
that?
75%? The original number 75%?
It takes 75
Yeah.
threshold cause the change.
And Dick, do I remember right that in essence we act, well, crudely put, the only way I can think of is we act more as a landowner than a government for purposes of this?
Yes, you're being asked your consent as a landowner, not as a regulatory body.
Thank you.
So can we still do that this time for the percentage then?
You know, tonight, what I'd propose is just going back to like we talked about, just the vote as a landowner. I think we were looking for that because at the time we didn't have any response. So we were early in the process and we hadn't received any signed amendments back. And then in the weeks that followed here, we do have some momentum now, and we've accumulated responses from 5 of the 10 totaling pushing 50%. So I think at this time, we just ask for your approval.
Have you had anybody refuse or say no to the proposal and given you a response of no?
No, we've had a couple of things. One is on the, and not to get sidetracked, but on the approvals, we've had a letter of recommendation. We've had a lot of positive response from the 5 out of 10. There's 4 remaining landowners aside from the city, and everyone is, one is they just received the document, 2 of them are corporate where they had to process this request. And so no one said flat out no, and they're just considering the request, and then we hope to accomplish that and obtain those approvals here in the coming weeks.
And it's appropriate for me to ask questions. Do
Ask.
of those, you named 3 out of 4. What? And this is a pro rata land ownership. Is there one significant landowner who's holding out? If you got those 3 out of 4, would you be at your 75% number if the city came in, or?
Absolutely. And let's say that the city takes us to 56. I believe there's a smaller landowner that would quickly take us over 60. And then we've got, of the 3, we've got one that is relying on the consent of another landowner, basically because they have a first right of refusal, and that would be the hotel group. So Chuck Mackey, the prior owner of the hotel, indicated that he had no problem going along. However, he did not want to disrupt anything with his first right of refusal. So we're also working with the gentleman on the hotel, with the hotel group. And then he's the one that requires the corporate authority. They have a REIT that has ownership, and it's a little more of a process.
I'm still uncomfortable voting on this. I would have preferred to see that you get your threshold before, come and ask us last. That's my preference. Why did you not do it that way?
One is because we have a 30-day window, so when these are distributed, they have to be distributed to each of the 10 landowners, so we sent these all out at the same time.
Right.
And so in the first case, where we were coming at lot 3, Mr. Wade had just put it in front of, he received this document, so he put it in front of the council for consideration. Then when we revised it and we postponed the request here to tonight, we're the same process. We're just doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. And we can't, it's not that can't be done, but I think one thing we were looking for, we had no votes 2 weeks ago. We were looking to see if we had some traction or some momentum. And I believe we do have that. In the fact that the last a copy was received on the 18th, you're talking less than a week, we've reached the 45% mark of signed documents.
One option the council would have tonight is to authorize the mayor to execute once it's been established that, with 61, where we at? Yeah, 64% of the other property, or 64% of the property has been established, to have signed off on it as well. So we would make the last 11% to get it over to the 75.
Sounds reasonable.
I would be more comfortable with that.
And if may, Dick, do we, is it such that the 30 days, is that a deadline such that if someone doesn't accept, it's automatically deemed a no, or is in essence, are we held to some sort of deadline in which we must respond?
No, that was a minimum period for all, to provide time for consideration with each of the landowners. So just a minimum period that we have to get out there, basically to serve notice.
I see, thank you.
I caution the council though to vote their mind on what they want to do. I don't know that I'd let my vote be the result of what 64% of a required 75%. I mean, if you think it's the right thing to do, then vote that way. But if you don't say, well, I'm just going to vote that way and let somebody else make my decision for me.
I just figure that they're the ones that are gonna be most impacted. I mean, we're an 11% owner.
Yeah.
It's gonna impact them, those property owners right now, and especially the already existing businesses. And, to me, it's like, well, I don't wanna make a decision that's gonna impact them further than what they would impact themselves, because, that's just not, I know we're looking at it as a landowner, but I don't wanna say, yeah, I think that's great. and be the final one, and there's, because there's only one it's not like, those hotels might not want that, and it may hurt them, and I just don't know. I wanna wait and hear what their response is, or the one hotel, I guess.
Yeah, the same way.
I think a lot of times, though, too, it comes down to if you feel strongly one way or the other. I very much take the mayor's point that you might as well show your cards if you do feel very strongly one way or the other, I would think.
Well, I do think among the stakeholders, and one thing has been very clear is we can sit here tonight and I think when we talk about strongly consider your feelings, we need, and the reason we came forth with the response we've had so far is it is very important to each of those that responded in terms of, and these are neighboring landowners. So we're talking each of the restaurants on 23rd Avenue have responded. We're talking about the largest landowner within the development has responded very strongly. And that kind of response, and we don't need to, not trying to name each one here, but it was also, they asked me to communicate the importance of this, not just as a catalyst for new development, being that it's the first project in quite a while, but everything from property taxes, this to get the next project rolling. And they're down there right now as taxpayers, and they're looking for what am I getting back here? And so they think the development is stagnant. They're looking for something to get this moving along. Each of them, we've either had face-to-face meetings, we submitted packages, but they had the same concerns that the council members might have, including the quality of the project that's come up every time. So we've done, or they've done the same diligence, where we've either met in person or we've submitted packages and responded to questions or concerns. So we've been through this process. It's not as if we just submitted this amendment, asked for their approval. So it's been a lengthy process with each of the
So is that
landowners.
The same process you went through with this board?
Yes.
Have you seen
And a lot of it.
project?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So we've also done, and the other point I would say is that back in November when we went in front of the planning commission, we wanted to get that step out of the way so we were able to present this project to the city and to the commission, make any adjustments necessary before we even sent the final renderings, the final specifications to the landowners as part of them reviewing this amendment. So we figured if we went through that process, we'd have any adjustments. The buyers willing to make those adjustments. And we have modified the plans and the site plans and the renderings to meet the requirements. And that was important to the landowners. They wanted to know that we did go through that process. And, but we've reached that point now. Here we feel we are at the back end. The buyer has been committed to the process from when they executed the contract in September. They went into this fully aware of the hotel restriction and what it would take to get through that. So I think we feel, you know, we're at the back end here, and from that last council meeting to get 45, not that I didn't expect to get support, to get to that 45% mark, and then hopefully tonight to get over the 50% mark in less than a week. And yes, it may take a couple weeks, it may take some time to work with the other landowners, but we're willing to work through that process and get the necessary vote.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any other questions on the resolution?
I didn't know if Larry wanted a chance to briefly speak to the perceived need for a user fee increase. No? All right, well.
Did we increase this last year? Was this the same one we increased?
It's been
a
about
little last
5 years, hasn't it?
You don't,
Mercy.
I thought we did an increase last year, but maybe it's
Did we?
something different.
I brought Tom with me too, extra ammo here on this.
We did an increase on groups maybe last year. Does that sound right?
We have,
That was at the soccer, wasn't it the soccer complex that we increased?
I think we
was
did
something.
golf.
Something with golf, I
groups
just didn't remember what it
for
was.
Special events, is that?
Yeah, I think you did.
Westwood, we did some stuff on corporate memberships and kind of
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
like that, but nothing at Westwood.
so the fees we're proposing, I think, are reasonable. We did a survey of area golf courses. It looks like we're about where we should be. Course is in pretty good shape. We've been working hard after the flood to get it back. And we'd like to move forward. It's kind of $2 for 18 and $1 for 9, and then some adjustments to the season passes for the juniors.
What amount of lead time do they have to give us if Harris sells that property?
Oh, that's a good question, Mayor. I don't know. We are gonna move the sign out of the way of the clubhouse, though.
Yeah, it's huge.
Maybe Dick knows, I'm not.
Jay have to let.
Larry, can I ask you, this sort of increase is in a fee is something somebody can entirely avoid if they're not playing golf at a course, and if it's a means by which the general taxpayer doesn't subsidize a fun activity that people willingly engage in, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think our philosophy is, we want to have golf at a rate that people can afford, but it needs to be at a market rate. It needs to be, if we were in a business of doing public golf, which we are, we want to be sure that we're positioned correctly. And every year we look at it, and every year we make a decision, and so we're back saying it's time to bump it a little bit.
And the last increase was when? 2005? 2009, great, okay, thank you.
Ironically, you will get, and I'll say this, and there'll be a lot of people here, you'll get nobody here for the budget, you'll get people here for this fee increase. Because my son or daughter is an avid golfer, and now you're pricing them out of the market. So.
Usually every couple of years, we're still a little bit cheaper than the same par threes in Omaha right now. Probably should have done it a couple.
Should probably come to the microphone so people can hear you.
Probably should have done it a couple of years ago, but because of the flood, conditions were terrible. We didn't want to increase rates, scare people away. Our concerns were Dodge first, get that back in shape, then we worked on Westwood. So Westwood's pretty good shape now. We got some things planned, some leagues, some different outing activities, and we feel that the rate increase is justified and still lower than similar courses in Omaha.
And an excellent view.
And an excellent view.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll ask one more time on resolutions, just in case. Applications for permits and cancellations? Any other business? See you back here, and
We've got 5 minutes.
if anyone's interested, they're welcome to come across the street for the emergency management budget meeting.
There you go.
No, thank you.
At Council Bluffs Savings Bank, we take pride in our community, volunteering our time to helping individuals, families, and businesses succeed. We are Council Bluffs people operating a Council Bluffs bank to help Council Bluffs be a better place to work and live. Hometown banking, the way it used to be.